Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Kat Abughazaleh, the candidate for Congress in Illinois, has been doing a little bit of rounds in the media lately. She kind of publicly got into a dispute with ICE where they threw her to the ground, and that clip circulated a lot through the media. It's also happened to her a couple times because she has consistently been at these protests outside of a Broadview, Illinois facility where they are housing migrants that have been arrested in the Chicago area. This is a facility that is near Chicago, kind of outside of it, and there have been consistent protests over the last several weeks trying to get some accountability from the agents inside this building, who they're arresting, what they're doing with them. You'll hear a little bit from Kat Abughazaleh about what exactly their concerns are in this facility. And it's becoming one of the flashpoints of resistance against ICE and federal agents, as is Portland. But Kat Abughazaleh went on Jen Psaki's program, the former spokesman for the Biden White House. Not somebody I have a terrible amount of interest in, but Kat Abughazaleh went on this program and made some very interesting comments about these protests and about Kristi Noem. So let me play that for you real quick.
This is a processing facility. It is only supposed to hold people for 12 hours at a time. But we have heard reports of people being held for days or weeks at a time, without beds or hot meals or access to hygienic facilities. It is likely that the conditions in the Broadview Processing Center are much worse than we already know, because ICE will not allow our elected officials to inspect the facility, which is our leaders' legal right. ICE masks their faces. ICE set up gates to keep us away from their crimes. ICE boards up their windows. Republicans have described Chicago as a war zone. They are obviously wrong, but Broadview is a war zone. It's a war zone with the government waging war on peaceful protesters.
This facility is where anyone that is abducted in the Chicago area probably ends up. This is where they end up. And as I described earlier, they're held in inhumane conditions. A few weeks ago, I believe about 6 weeks ago now, a couple of protesters were arrested at a vigil for peacefully blocking a van. And week after week, more and more people have showed up. I showed up the next week, and we have been out there every Friday morning to bear witness to deportations happening and to demand transparency, accountability, and safety from our leaders in regards to this ICE facility.
There's going to be consequences for how these guys act and for what they do and how they impede our vehicles when they lay hands on our officers, but even prevent them from going out and doing their duties. And we're going to not just show them that we're here to stay, but that we're going to expand our footprint and make sure that the citizens of Chicago are put first and that their safety is put first.
That was speaking with podcaster Benny Johnson, by the way, but that is so out of touch, disconnected, cruel, lots of words. But what is your response to that? You're living with this. You see it.
Yeah, I think Kristi Noem should have consequences. I think she should be tried at The Hague. What we are seeing from her operation are crimes against humanity. And if the response from ICE to people exercising their First Amendment right is to drive vehicles through them, is to shoot them, is to put a stationary gun on top of a roof, as we saw today, they shouldn't be allowed to operate. If that is what their operations entail, they should not be an agency in the United States. What I really want to stress to people is that none of this is normal. It is not normal to have masked men rappel down from helicopters into apartment buildings to arrest families in the middle of the night. That is not normal. It is not normal to have agents with no identification of where they work, who they are, what they are allowed to do. That is not normal. At least in the United States, it's not normal. Today, we were corralled into a free speech zone. And I'm not a big fan of that term because it implies there are areas in the US that are non-free speech zones, mainly everywhere else. It is ICE's responsibility to respect and uphold our rights. It is not on us to accommodate them. And it is not on us to accommodate Kristi Noem's racist, fascist agenda.
All right, so I've mentioned Kat Abughazaleh a little bit on this platform before. She's running for Congress in Illinois, and what she's been doing, she's tried a few interesting tactics, including making her campaign also a mutual aid effort and like a food pantry that, in her words, is open to everyone except ICE. And also tried some interesting online marketing tactics for her campaign, sort of taking some notes from Zohran Mamdani. What she's trying right now is doing streaming as a campaign fundraising and promotional tactic, which is interesting because it's a great way to raise funds, but the problem that Kat Abughazaleh is sort of facing in terms of campaigning is that the people she's reaching are not necessarily the voters that need to vote for her. And originally, in the race that she was running, she was up against an incumbent who'd been there since 1999, and so it was this like establishment Democrat versus young feisty fighter. But then that Democrat dropped out of the race. So since then, it's been a much more crowded field. You have different progressives of different stripes that are now competing with Kat Abughazaleh. So it's not so much of an underdog narrative anymore. So we'll see. But she's trying these creative tactics. And above all, she's putting herself on the front lines of this fight. And she's getting a decent amount of media attention over it. I think that by going this route, she's made herself a little bit more of a national figure, as well as putting herself at the center of an issue that reflects broadly across not just America, but across Illinois and Chicago. It's something that a lot of people are worried about right now. So we'll see how that works in terms of her campaign. One interesting thing that she mentions here that I think is very important for everybody to keep in mind when it comes to things like this. She says that there was a peaceful vigil where a couple protesters peacefully blocked the movement of a vehicle that led to some confrontation, and that essentially was the spark that has kept going and kept protesters showing up at the same spot every Friday morning. So that is a certain tactic. It's difficult right now in America to plan protests, large-scale protests around like everyday type activity. So this is a different method where you set a time and you keep coming back at that time. And this is actually a very important tactic when it comes to building momentum, because the only way that you're going to be able to get people interested in coming out, showing support for something like this, is if they see others doing it, if they see you doing it visually, and especially if it becomes some kind of common cause because they see that you are being incited and attacked by federal police, especially in such a sort of authoritarian fashion, which is what we're seeing from them. So the more you show up there at the same time every week, you're building momentum and pressure on these agents, and they know it, they feel it. They've had to build up their presence. They have the Director of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, come out to sort of oversee this stuff. Now, the flaw in this tactic is that if you show up at the same time every Friday, then they know you're coming every Friday and they can control the situation a little better. So it seems like that is what has happened in these protests, is it's gone from a somewhat fluid situation where you have protesters at least reportedly doing things like slashing tires, blocking vehicles. Let's be honest, these are effective tactics. These are the tactics that got the agents and the people in leadership at this facility to say that they need extra help. And so it is an escalation that increases attention on you. It causes people like Kristi Noem to go on television and talk about it, and they're going to do everything they can to try to cast protesters as the bad guys and all of that. But they are losing the narrative. That's an important thing to keep in mind. And it's a crucial time for them to be losing the narrative because they have not consolidated power yet. They're working on that. In my personal opinion, I believe that the government shutdown slows down their ability to consolidate power. And they're going to try to posture as though that's not the case. Like, oh, Project 2025 is really kicking into gear because of the government shutdown and Russell Vought. It's not true. Russell Vought doesn't want the government to be shut down, and that's because Russell Vought can't carry out the things that he wants to do and has been carrying out if the government shut down. So that works in our advantage. There's some reporting that a lot of people in DHS, Border Patrol, and ICE are still going to receive pay, or they're not essentially going to be the ones that are affected by this shutdown. So that is definitely something that doesn't work in our favor. However, the longer this goes on, the more that is going to fatigue these agencies and is going to push them into territory where they no longer have the funding to support these operations and to support continuing to throw bodies at places like Portland and Chicago, where these main fronts of resistance are happening. So this is a crucial moment for them to be facing a lot of resistance. And it is a problem if, like Kat Abughazaleh says here, they have been sequestered at this Broadview facility into what is known as free speech zones, a place where essentially they're allowed to protest, and if they move outside of that, that's when I guess they get engaged by agents. So that is a crowd control tactic by them, because this is public property and people have the right to protest. But it's a way to control that, and as Kat Abughazaleh notes, if there's a zone that is a free speech zone, what does that make everything else? All of America is supposed to be a free speech zone. So the reality is they need more people. The more people show up, the more the boundaries that DHS and the feds have tried to set here can be pushed back upon. And there does need to be some chaotic and sort of guerrilla tactics utilized here. Things like slashing the tires. It's important for us to escalate these tactics. And yes, it's dangerous. Yes, arrests are going to be made. Yes, these agents are scary. And in some cases, they have guns and they're acting insane. But we are at a place in America where it's time to recognize what we're up against. And as they are trying to use things like NSPM 7, the new terrorist designation for anybody who's anti-fascist or anti-capitalist, or trying to cast any type of anti-fascist language or something that can be accused of being anti-fascist language, or even criticizing somebody like Charlie Kirk, they're trying to use all of that to say that you're some kind of violent terrorist and that you must be apprehended. And the point of that is to chill resistance, both in form of speech and in form of action. They are trying to ramp up these federal operations throughout the country. And so they're trying to make people afraid to speak out against it. That is a classic fascist tactic. But we have to remember that we're at a point where they don't have the ability to enforce that yet. They're building it up. And the quickness to which we can build meaningful resistance against that is going to determine whether or not we can meaningfully push back against this authoritarian overreach. It's going to take them more time to consolidate enough power that they can fully just do whatever they want in multiple U.S. cities at the same time. But they're trying to get that foothold. And resistance like this does pose a meaningful threat. That's why people like Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem are going on TV to try to tamp down that resistance and try to drum up fear against those protesters. So the fact that they're continuing to have these every Friday is something that people in the area need to continue to be aware of. And if you can show up for that, show up for it. If you can support Kat Abughazaleh, either the Mutual Aid Fund through her campaign, support her through her stream, or again, show up for these protests, now's the time to do it. And as I've been saying, this government shutdown is happening, and it's happening over healthcare and whether or not essentially tax credits, a certain provision of Obamacare, is going to expire, and Democrats are fighting over that. So it seems like a small ask. I'm not sure if many Americans really understand that. I think they've communicated well that this is about healthcare. Republicans are trying to make it about illegal immigrants getting healthcare, which is bullshit, and it doesn't seem like Americans are buying it. There is some information, some polling coming out that Americans blame Republicans for this, and Democrats need to seize on that. Even if that wasn't the case, even if the polling was showing that people blame Democrats, which we might see some polling to that effect, I don't think they should care. I think the one thing they're doing well right now is they've shut down the government, and they're throwing their hands up and they're saying, we're going to let this play out and let's see what happens. And obviously some of their messaging has been a little bit clumsy. Again, this is Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. We are not sending our best in this case. But in my opinion, the longer this goes on, the more opportunity there will be to mount pressure, especially if they start facing meaningful resistance at these flashpoints in Portland, LA, and Chicago. And if they start to have an increasing demand for resources to meet that they're not getting from the government. The problem at that point is if Democrats get what they want because of these tax credits, it's not that big of an ask. And so once the pressure really starts mounting, it's actually going to be an easy thing for Republicans to give them, get the government back going, and then everything is where it was before. And I think Democrats and just us, people in general, need to not take that for an answer and take this as an opportunity to really build the pressure to stop this authoritarian takeover. This is an opportunity to show that Americans are not going to take this. And at one point or another, we have to show that, because otherwise they're going to put in place as many structures of repression as they possibly can. And that's what this is. That's what we're seeing the beginnings of. Okay, but this shutdown is coming at a good time. And as for sort of rotating consistent protests, there's another of the so-called No Kings protests coming up on, I think, the 18th of October. So this was an enormous protest that happened some months back, I think shortly after Trump came into office. And I had criticisms for it at the time because, this is meant to be a peaceful demonstration, and that's all well and good, except look at what it accomplished then. It accomplished nothing then, and if they're taking the same approach again, it's going to accomplish nothing again. But what it is doing is it's gathering a lot of people, and it's also utilizing this tactic of having rolling, consistent protests and demonstrations that can build support over time. So that's great. But if it's going to do anything, what they need to do is they need to create a system for them to make demands of lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers and Republican lawmakers and Trump himself. This protest means nothing if there's not some way that they can exert pressure on the people in power. It's not enough to demonstrate. It's not enough for people to gather. It's enough people that you can apply a lot of pressure. But that pressure is going to have to be associated with their labor power or their consumer power. And one thing I will say about 5051, since that first protest that they had, I don't remember what month it was, is that they have genuinely escalated their rhetoric. And what I've been seeing from them online is a lot more aligned with radical tactics to try to grind this administration to a halt, pointing out its connection to imperialism and capitalism, that sort of thing. I'm starting to see more language from the people organizing over there at 5051, and that is good, because if you're correctly identifying the core of the problem here, then you can start to actually organize some real action and some real pressure to stop it. So we will see what that amounts to. It seems like their protest tactics are more, keep everything in line, keep everything peaceful. I'm all for peaceful, but if you're going to do peaceful, you have to be peaceful and disruptive. And that's what they've been doing well in Broadview. And the reality is, yes, that does cause them to escalate. That does cause, especially these ultra aggressive federal police, to do things like shoot pepper balls at people and treat people violently. The reality is that we have to escalate, because that is their tactic. The Trump administration, everybody associated with him, Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, they do nothing but escalate. Since Charlie Kirk got shot, it's been nothing but going on TV and escalating. And they know they're doing that. And the whole reason that they want to tamp down dissent on the other side is because they want to continue escalating. So we have to do away with this narrative that it's on the left, it's on Democrats to bring down tensions. That's bullshit. They want us to do that so that they can roll over us. And right now is the moment where we can show that we're not going to do that. And we are going to mount as much resistance as we possibly can to this authoritarian takeover. And that is going to require escalation of tactics, escalation of rhetoric, and escalation of demands. So 5051 and other organizations like it, especially these giant demonstrations, you're going to have to start encouraging people to use their power to boycott, use their labor power. It's time to start talking about striking, especially as the government is shut down. We can grind business as usual in America to a halt, and that is what you are supposed to do during an authoritarian takeover like this, not to mention the overreaches of Israel, which are causing riots and strikes nationwide. America is not participating in that because the organizational structure is not there. So something like 5051, whether they like it or not, are creating the infrastructure for real radical action like that. And if it's not going to be the organizers, at least people within it, people going to those organizations, people going to those protests, etc., need to start talking about that and need to encourage people to utilize the leverage that they have in society. The dollars that you spend are leverage. What you do with your time, where you go to work, and what you do or don't say at work is your leverage. And the only way that we are going to escalate the defense of our rights and the defense of the democracy of the United States is if we start escalating. And if we do that, on a mass basis, yes, on a peaceful basis, but also on a very direct and a very demanding basis, then we can start to take power back, and we can do it quickly, but we're gonna need to build up momentum quickly. Pressure getting pressed, do you feel it now? What even happens next, I don't really know. Voice carries less, can you hear me now? Soon as I get blessed, time's running out. Pressure getting pressed. Pressure getting pressed. Feel the pressure getting pressed. Yeah. Pressure, do you feel it now? I'm just saying this.